Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of this top 10, something a little bit different than what I normally do. It's not a wrestling related top 10. This is my 10 favorite X-Men. And there's a lot that's going to go into that. I've long been a fan of the X-Men comic books. I've played multiple X-Men video games. I love the X-Men cartoon, which is kind of why I did this, because if you're unaware, they brought a continuation of the 90s X-Men cartoon in X-Men 97 on Disney Plus, and it's fantastic. It pretty much follows along with the cartoon. If you were a fan of the cartoon, either as a kid or have watched it since, I definitely recommend it. And that made me think to myself, who are my favorite X-Men? And this is a combination of all that, the movies, everything. My list is probably going to be a lot different than most people's, as you'll see, but it is my personal list. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. Number 10, Deadpool. Yep, I hear you. He's one of the most iconic comic book characters of the last decade or so. Everybody's a fan of Deadpool. I love Deadpool. I'm a huge fan of Deadpool. I just paid $400 to have his first appearance in a comic book, so yeah, I'm a fan of Deadpool. The reason he ranks so low on this list, I've been a fan of most of the things he's appeared in, whether it be the comic books, the live action movies with Ryan Reynolds, except for X-Men Origins. I think they flubbed him really badly there, and other stuff. The reason he's so low here is because it's very questionable he's an X-Man. There have been times where he's helped a team, and he's definitely been part of X-Force, which is kind of an offshoot of the X-Men. But as far as I can remember, and it may be different because it's very convoluted within the comic books, timelines change, histories change, group affiliations change. It may have changed, and I may have just not read that book, but he's never officially been a member of the X-Men in the comic books. He's been affiliated. So that's why I can't put him up much higher than this, because he's really not officially a member. I know, it's semantics, but it's my list and that's my reasoning. Going from that on number 9, Betsy Braddock, aka Psylock. Psylock is one of those really cool characters that kind of hasn't had a great portrayal in other media other than the comic books. I know she's been portrayed in 2 different X-Men movies, very minorly in The Last Stand, and she played a bigger role in X-Men Apocalypse, which is a mixed bag. I'm a huge fan of the villain Apocalypse. He's one of my favorite villains in all of comics. The movie didn't do him his best. Olivia Munn did do pretty decent, and I would have liked to seen her in a better movie as Psylocke. I think she might have been better fit for the role. There's something about the whole character, her tie to Captain Britain, all of that I just gravitated to. I think she's an interesting character, and it didn't hurt that when I was reading these comic books, when Psylocke was being brought into the X-Men, when she was first coming around, I was a teenage boy, and I mean, look at her. And yes, I know it's silly, but I enjoyed reading her. She's a good character. Now going from that on number 8, Gambit. If we were solely going off of the X-Men cartoon, Gambit would probably be in the top 2 or 3 on my list, because that portrayal is probably one of the better ones in the cartoon, if you ask my honest opinion. I think it got the character perfectly. It added to the character. It made him more interesting than what I thought he was in the comics. And that's not to say I don't think Gambit's interesting. I like Gambit, hence why he's on this list. But he never really connected with me until I seen the cartoon. And then in the cartoon, him and the dichotomy between him and Rogue was more palatable. It made more sense to me. Everybody has that feeling of yearning for something that they can't have. He's just a really good character. The backstory's awesome. I enjoy Gambit. I think he's awesome, and hence why he's on my list. Going from that, our number 7, Nightcrawler. He almost solely gets on here because of the old X-Men Sega Genesis game, or Sega Mega Drive game, depending on what part of the world you're watching me in. And I don't know if that was released anywhere else other than America. Was it released for the Mega Drive? I really don't know. But anyway, it's not a great game. It was a fun game. I used to play it all the time. And one of the cheesiest, cheapest characters was Nightcrawler, because you could do the teleportation, and by doing that you could basically skip parts of levels when you could teleport through a wall that you were supposed to go up and around and all that stuff. So using Nightcrawler was very beneficial to you. He's had some great portrayals in the comic book series, in the cartoons, the movies. He's came off really well. He's just a very interesting character, again, and his whole backstory, everything about him. He's just very interesting. He's one of those characters that everybody instantly associates with the X-Men, and it's for good reason. He's one of the better members of the team. I absolutely love him. That's why he's on my list. I'll go on from that, our number 6. Jubilee. Jubilee is a character that really resonated with me as well, and it's a lot because she was around the same age that I was when I started reading about Jubilee in the comic books. She had similar interests. Her portrayal in the cartoon series as being that teenager, as being that younger kid, kind of spoke to me, being the same teenager / younger kid. She seemed to add a coolness factor to the X-Men that they didn't have, and not that the X-Men weren't cool, like a pop culture type coolness. She was more of her time, and still is, than the X-Men themselves were. She feels like she fits in that generation. Like I said, that's why she resonated with me. She's of the same generation I am. Her powers are probably the silliest of anyone on this list, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. There's a series of videos that a comedian named Pete Holmes put out like a decade or so ago, mocking the X-Men and their powers, and basically he's like, oh, you create a rave, pew pew pew. And it was funny, but it's kind of true. Her powers aren't what make her so special to me. The character and the character work and the character development is what made her feel special. She was an allegory for a teenager trying to fit in, that's different, that's not accepted, that may have some people that dislike her just because who she is. It really felt like my story. That's why I love Jubilee. That's why she's on my list. And I know I keep saying that at the end. And going from that, our number 5, Bishop. Bishop, when you look at his character design, it screams 90s. It's guns, it's pockets, it's bullet shells, it's everything that was popular in the early 90s, especially in the Rob Liefeld and Liefeld-esque comic books. And yeah, there's a lot to that. I like Bishop because I enjoy his whole timey-wimey time traveler aspect of him. And it's silly, and I know it's some of the more fantastical and some of the more outrageous things that have happened in the X-Men. And trust me, the X-Men, if you're looking for a comic book that's grounded in reality, yes, some of the stories are reality grounded, but the places they take them are not at all. They go into space, they go into time travel, they go into the past, they go into the future, they go everywhere. And when you lean into that and you accept that and you read it, Bishop's a really great written character. There was a great series that came out about 20 years or so ago called District X, where it took Bishop and made him more of a grounded kind of a detective in the Marvel Universe. And I thought that was fantastic. It was a nice development and nice addition to his character. The series, I only think it went like a year, maybe a year and a half before it was canceled. Or it may have just been a limited run as planned. I don't remember the specifics. But I remember it was one of those series that I wanted more of. It's one of those series that I wish they would have continued and expounded on what they were doing there, because I thought it was really good. Bishop is super cool. He's definitely part of the reboot series now, and he's a main character in the reboot. He was a character in the original cartoon series, but he was more of a sometimes character. It seems that he's going to be part of the main character. They put him in the opening credits. So yeah, it's cool to see him get his comeuppance. I like Bishop. Now going from that, our number 4, Colossus. Again, this has a lot to do with the video games, and Colossus was an absolute beast in that same Sega Genesis game, and also the X-Men vs. Street Fighter series. He was really great there, or X-Men vs. Capcom, or whatever it was at the time. I forget what the names of them were. They're really expensive if you try to go back and buy them, but they're fun games. They're really fun, and it's one of the reasons why that whole fighting mechanics was awesome. I like Colossus, and I like the interaction he has with the other X-Men and how he works with the other X-Men. He definitely feels like he belongs. He feels like he's an important part of the team. He's one of the more interesting characters, especially when you take into effect when he first was added and was part of the X-Men. It was very much still in the Cold War, and here we have a Russian superhero being portrayed as a good guy, as opposed to most of the time they were portrayed as the villains because obviously we're in the middle of the Cold War. I really enjoy Colossus, hence why he's on my list. I know, I keep saying the same thing. Going from that, our number 3. This is one that's probably going to catch a lot of flames. This is probably most other people's favorite X-Man, and that's Wolverine. And that's not to say that I dislike Wolverine. I very much love Wolverine. I think he's a great character. One of the comic books I would most like to have is Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine. Even though it's very highly debated, I am among the people that think that Hulk 180 is his first appearance. I have Hulk 182, which is cool. I'd love to get 180 and 181 at some point, when it's financially feasible for me, just because I enjoy that character that much. I like to, as a collector of comic books, I like to try and get comics for the people I really like, their first appearances. Like Deadpool, I have Psylock, I have Gambit, I have Jubilee, I have Bishop. Some of the others that it's just not within my price range, I don't have yet, but maybe one day I will. They're on the wish list, if that makes sense. Wolverine's iconic. He's the first person you think of when you think of the X-Men. Maybe Xavier, maybe Cyclops, but you definitely think of Wolverine as the face of the company. I mean, he was a guy in the 80s and the 90s. There were so many comic books that he was involved in. He had his own comic book. He had the X-Men. He would cross over with every other group. He was part of the Fantastic Four for a little bit. He was part of the Avengers, all that stuff. He was everywhere. And for good reason. It's a really cool character. I really like Wolverine, and I know a lot of you guys are going to flame me for not making him number 1, but hey, it's my list. Now going from that, our number 2. We talked about timey-wimey aspects and time travel. Our second time traveler on the list, Cable. I kind of feel like I'm not necessarily in the minority when saying how much I enjoy Cable and how much I enjoy the Cable comic books, and he is another one I have his first appearance. I don't think he's somewhat overlooked. I just think that he isn't thought of as much as the other X-Men. And I really like him. I like the whole technovirus aspect. I like the fact that he's coming from the future. And here's a mild spoiler, which may or may not play out in the cartoon because the cartoon may deviate from the comic book. He's the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, who was a clone of Jean Grey, which again may play out in the cartoon, so I do apologize if that's a spoiler, but that story's been out for 30 years now. I really liked him. Much like Bishop, much like Deadpool, he is very much a character that was designed in that early 90s era, with the bullets, with the pockets, with the guns. It's a whole trope. If you go back and look at all of the new characters that came in the 90s, you'll see that pattern. You'll see that they're heavily armored, they have pockets all over them. It's ridiculous, but in a way, to me, it's cool. It's really cool. I was buying those comic books, and they were the coolest thing in the world to me at the time, and still some of the coolest things in the world to me. I really like Cable. Like I said, I don't know that he's this high on most people's lists, but for me, he's one of the most interesting people that I read in the comic books. As far as character-wise, I love reading about Cable. I love his story. I love everything about it. He's just that cool to me. Now, before we get to our number 1, if you haven't seen my videos before, I do a thing here called the best of the rest. Basically, it is things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. With that being said, first up, Beast. Beast is kind of a character that I really enjoy, but I also feel like he's a lesser version of the Incredible Hulk or Smart Hulk. They have a lot of the same properties, and don't get me wrong, I like Beast. The Incredible Hulk is one of my favorite comic book characters. I just think there's a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover between the two, especially when we got to the Intelligent Hulk, where he can use his Bruce Banner side while being the Hulk. And that's not to say that there's not differences. There are differences. The character is not the same at all. But it feels to me like they're too similar for me to really appreciate Beast as his own thing, if that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I do enjoy him. I think he's fun. I really liked him in the cartoon. I liked his portrayal in the movies. I think he comes off really well. Fortunately, he didn't quite make my top 10. Now, last but not least on the best of the rest, I mentioned her romantic interest before. We're talking about Rogue. Rogue is another character that the cartoon made me appreciate her more than her comic book had, and it's not to say that she wasn't good in the comic book. She really is. It just always felt like she was an ancillary character until we got to the cartoon series where she got some of the main roles and she got storylines specifically built around her. I like her aspects. I like the fact that she could basically take anybody's powers, and that's been used for both good and bad. I'm really hoping to see how they handle that in the MCU. Is she going to take the powers from Carol Danvers like she did in the comic books and the cartoon? Are they going to modify that? It seems like Carol Danvers, the Brie Larson character, is someone that the MCU respects and wants to keep around as a main player. I don't know how they're going to do that. I hope it's well. I do enjoy Rogue, and I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the controversy of X-Men 97 right now and how they've made Rogue's butt smaller. It is so ridiculous. It's a cartoon. I mean, if you're looking at a cartoon and you're going, they made her butt smaller, I mean, that's just silly. I would not have even noticed if we're being perfectly honest. The only reason I'm bringing it up here is it's currently in the news cycle, and spoiler alert, if you think the X-Men are now woke or politically conscious or however you want to say that, I hate to break it to you. They've been that way since the very first comic book. They've always been a politically charged book. They've always been quote-unquote woke. The whole allegory of the X-Men is the plight of African Americans in America in the 60s. It's the civil rights movement. Professor Xavier is Martin Luther King. Magneto is Malcolm X. That's the whole fight. That's the civil rights movement. That's what they were portraying. And they've gone on to do several different things. I know we're going off on a different tangent, and I know speaking about this is probably going to get some comments down here about that, and I don't want to make it about that. I really don't. If you enjoy the X-Men, enjoy the X-Men, but don't try to say that that hasn't always been an aspect. It's kind of like people, I've seen the same thing with the band Rage Against the Machine. People just all of a sudden realize that they're a political band, and now they don't stand with their political ideology even though they've listened to them for 30 years. It doesn't make sense to me. I understand if you don't like the X-Men for that reason, but don't tell me that you like the X-Men up until a certain point and then they got woke, because they've always been that way. Just saying, I understand this was very controversial, or as controversial as I get on my videos. I try to stay very much out of that because it's not a world that I really delve into much. But anyway, I digress. Before we do get to number one, if you think I left a character off, put a character too high, too low, let me know down here in the comments. While you're there, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And if you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Becoming a channel member definitely helps out. Shout out to Chris. Thank you very much, my friend, for being a member. It really does help out. It helps me to get more materials, more equipment. I appreciate that. With all that being said, my favorite X-Men, the number one X-Man of all time, Shadowcat, aka Kitty Pryde. And she's had like 17 other different names in the comic books. I prefer Shadowcat. I think it's her best nom de plume. I talked about this when I talked about Jubilee and how her character resonated with me and felt like a character that represented me a bit. Kitty Pryde is another one. She's a character that I felt represented me, and much like with Jubilee, Kitty Pryde is another character that resonates to me. She's of my generation, she speaks to my generation. Her powers, her abilities, the fact that she had a pet dragon named Lockheed, all that was just really cool to me. And I really enjoy her writing. She is my favorite character in the X-Men, whether it be her series in the comic books with Wolverine when they had a little run, her own adventures, the different things she's done over the years, her and Colossus's romance. It's all been really interesting. She is the one character that I think most consistently I've enjoyed everything that she's been in and everything that she's done. She hasn't quite been done great in the movies, or she's been done well, just not used as a primary character in the movies. But every other place that she's been used, she works extremely well. I think she's a really fun character. I really enjoy her. I'll pick up any comic book that's centered around her, whether it be her own comics, whether it be X-Men or a team up or anything of that nature, just because I enjoy the writing. It seems that the writers really get her character and they don't deviate from it that often. As with other people on this list that have went all different ways and different routes, I kind of feel like part of that is she's not the most popular X-Men. If you look at this list, there's probably the other 9 X-Men that I've listed are more popular than her. So maybe she flies under the radar. Maybe the expectations aren't as great for her to do crazy things. I don't know. To me, I think she's my favorite. That's why she's my number 1. If you made it here to the end, let me know your opinion. Who is your favorite X-Man? Put it down here in the comments. It could be somebody on the list. It could be somebody I left off. There's great characters that I've left off this list. Angel, Archangel, same character. Jean Grey, Cyclops, Professor Xavier. There's some great characters that I haven't listed here that you could include down there. Or if your favorite's one that matches mine, let me know down here in the comments. And yes, I know you're probably mostly going to say Wolverine. He's everybody's favorite. But hey, that's cool. I enjoy him, so let me know down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been my Top 10 X-Men.